There we go. So I want to start our tour by just showing you a beautiful view of the location where, our talk will be taking place today, because Johannes Vermeer was a Dutch artist, and he was from the city called Delft, the city that you can see on your screens right now. I will give you a quick look around of this beautiful location. Look at these gorgeous little houses, churches, just stunning architecture. And just like Rembrandt, Vermeer was one of those local Dutch artists that never left the country. He worked mostly in Delft, and even more than that, most of his paintings, of which he had either 34 or 36, different art historians argue about the exact amount. Most of his paintings take place all in one room. There's only a few that don't take place there, and I will show them to you today as well. And in the few paintings where Delft is the main character, you can really see that the artist really admires this wonderful city. And there are definitely lots of reasons to admire Delft. A lot of things originated from Delft and spread all over the world. For example, you might have heard of the famous Delft tiles. If you have been with me since my Russia tours, you probably have seen some of the beautiful white and blue Delft tiles in some of the royal palaces. There are also really beautiful fabrics that originated from Delft, and carpets. You will see both the tiles and the porcelain and the carpets in Vermeer's paintings today. Finally, Vermeer's contemporaries would also travel to Delft to savor their delicious beer, because that was another thing that Delft was known for. Anyways, I wanted to start our tour today here in the center of Delft because of me wanting to explain to you how Vermeer got discovered. The thing is, he lived a relatively short life. He died at the age of 43. And after he died, his art was pretty much forgotten to the rest of the world. Some of his paintings were sold for very cheap. In fact, for example, the famous girl with the pearl earring that we will see later was sold for less than $1. Anyways, for over 200 years, nobody remembered who Vermeer was. Rembrandt and Frans Hals kind of had similar fate. And he was rediscovered again in the 19th century. And the painting that was first discovered and admired by one of the art critics of that time was this beautiful piece right here. You can see in Morris House in The Hague. This piece is called The View of Delft. And if you have seen works by Vermeer before, this probably would be not your typical Vermeer, but this is the piece that was discovered and just immediately became popular. When you look at this view in a museum, kind of like standing a couple steps away from it, it's almost hard to tell right away what is so special about this piece. Okay, it's just a, it's just a city view, it's just a landscape. We'll talk in a minute how this was, from the first glance, a typical painting for Dutch art of that time. But the secret here lies in the details. And actually, for a lot of the paintings today, I will be showing you what they look like in a museum setting, like this one. And then I'm going to go ahead and show you these paintings up close. You will notice that I'm using the Google Arts and Culture for a lot of my demonstrations. And if this sparks your interest, head to this website after our tour, because you can find lots of famous art there in incredible resolution, and really study the details, and then you can see what they look like in some of the famous museums. Anyway, just demonstrate to you why people in the 19th century were so mesmerized with this painting. I'm just going to give you a closer view, and I'm going to actually zoom in a lot. And now that I've zoomed in quite a lot, you can really start to discern Vermeer's manner when it comes to depicting the tiniest details. He really does have great attention to detail. For example, you can discern people walking around, people in boats. If you look through every arch, through every opening, there is something, always something hiding there. You know, when you think of the 19th century, especially the second half of the 19th century, you might remember that this was when the Impressionists started to really turn things around in terms of how art is made and how art is perceived. And the Impressionists studied a lot about how the human eye sees the world around us. That's why they went and painted a lot in the open air. That's why they pioneered a lot of different new kinds of brush strokes in the world. Some people believed that their paintings looked unfinished, and that is because the brush strokes that the Impressionists used sometimes were just bright, clear colors. And once Vermeer got rediscovered, they noticed something similar in his works. You can see that he uses, when you zoom in much closer, you notice that he uses the tiniest little specks of color, right? To make the surfaces in his pieces stand out and look shiny, or sometimes rough, to help us change our perception of the texture of the things in the paintings. Also, another interesting thing about Vermeer is that sometimes he uses little specks of gold in his pieces. If you look at the clock, you see that a little bit. And as art critics found out later, he never went cheap when it came to his art materials and paints. He always got the best of everything. And when he worked on his pieces, I'm just going to show you, zoom in on some more pieces. But, I don't want to spend too long on it. Feel free to head straight to Google Arts and Culture after our talk and find this piece that is called, again, The View of Delft. And you can zoom in and you can study every little detail, and you can see, just first of all, the kind of like the pointy nature of his brush strokes, and also the meticulousness of detail that Vermeer used in his pieces. You can really see that here. And again, look, he paints people, he paints, every little detail. And I think that is just quite incredible. And let's zoom out and again, see the final impression of this piece. Because he uses such meticulous brush strokes, it really gives this amazing impression of, like, we can feel what the air was like when Vermeer was painting this view, or when, I guess, the view that he had in mind. We can almost tell that the walls and the roofs of the buildings are glistening, maybe after it's just rained. And that's another thing that the Impressionists really tried to create as well. I got a question in the chat. Yeah, I'm so glad you like that. And when you think about it, the piece of it that is like Delft and its buildings is a very small part of the painting. When you look at it, it's just a stripe, and the rest of it is water and sky. And Another thing about Vermeer is that he would spend a very long time on one painting. He wasn't in a rush when it came to painting. It seems like painting was, as we would say nowadays, a side hustle for him. He ran his own little hotel, which is actually not uncommon for Holland at that time. A lot of artists at that time painted on the side. However, we know for sure that Vermeer was a professional artist because at the age of 21, he joined the Guild of Professional Artists, which was a sign of recognition. So we don't know much about where he studied art. And in fact, there's very little that we do know about Vermeer, but the things that I do know, I will share today. And before I move on, I just want to show you again, painting is not that big. Here's what it looks like on a museum wall. And that to me is also just incredible. And again, when we look at the paintings today, we will be looking at a fair amount of them on a museum wall and then up close, because up close is really what makes Vermeer's pieces so special. Some of you have seen my talks about Dutch art of that time, and if you haven't yet, I did show in the beginning how to find them on YouTube. But what I was sharing in those talks is that in the 17th century Holland, there is a true boom in the art industry. Hundreds of artists are creating over 1 million works collectively. The middle class is thriving. They are ordering paintings to hang in their homes. The art market is rapidly developing. And because art comes into people's houses, there are a few features of the art market at the time that we can discern. Number one, we can see that the majority of artists try to stick to one genre. And in general, we'd say that in that way, Vermeer was similar to them. The couple landscapes that we will see are the exception from the rule. He mostly thrived in a different genre that we will talk about. And number two, the art, in terms of its subjects and topics, becomes more accessible to people. And so artists often depict things that the consumer would enjoy, and we will see a lot of that with you today. But the reason Vermeer counts as such an outstanding artist when we compare him to his contemporaries is because while he does create things that the consumer would possibly enjoy, he does his absolute best, and he creates pieces that look incredibly realistic, have a lot of meticulous details, and finally, if you study them long enough, you can uncover some new meaning in them. I'm going to quickly show you just another quick landscape piece. Again, a tiny painting called The Little Street. And again, I'm going to give you an up-close look so that you can see just the detail that Vermeer goes into. So in this painting, I think is a wonderful example of how you can study detail, because when you look through every opening, you can see more and more and more. This one is quite dark, but if you zoom in, you do see that there is a room behind this woman with various details painted by an artist. If you look through this doorway right here, you can see that there's a lot more here as well. A window and a little staircase, a whole other part of this little street. And finally, even in the back here too. So again, he goes into lots of detail. And I also quickly want to show you this part of the painting. Again, to demonstrate his amazing brush strokes. We can again see specks of white, specks of gold that again really help us almost feel the texture of this painting. But as I said, landscapes do not become his genre that he creates a lot in. He finds himself more in what is known as a genre scene, or a scene from everyday life. And this one is one of his earlier works. And just quick interesting detail about it is that in the corner here, it's believed to be Vermeer's self-portrait. We don't know for sure. Again, we know very little about him, but it could be him. And when it comes to genre scenes, they could be divided into two groups. One would be, a very moralistic kind of painting that would show you what a proper housewife should be, or what a proper family should be. And this painting is a little different. It falls under the second kind. And here, this is all about kind of like people having fun, in a way, behaving in an indecent manner. And on one hand, you can read it as just like, oh, a fun little playful subject, or you can also read it in a moralistic way, like the way you shouldn't be behaving. This is indecent, This was a Protestant society they wanted to be very proper. They wanted to follow the rules, and art, in a way, was a way for them to let go of these limitations. On the other hand, this could be a way of teaching us a lesson. So you can see, yes, people acting in an indecent way. This woman is drinking some wine, being grabbed by this gentleman there. There is a deal already happening. She's like sticking out her hand to get some money in there. So just this is as common as Dutch genre scene of that time can be. But even in this, early work, we can see something that becomes really common when it comes to Vermeer's art. We see a lot of art for art's sake. And what I mean by that is when Vermeer paints, he goes for like fun, entertaining subjects that the consumer possibly would like. But it really looks like he himself enjoys painting and depicting different beautiful textures, beautiful objects, showing us beautiful colors. And here, really, what you can see on the forefront is this woman's beautiful dress and her head, and this gorgeous carpet. I told you, Delft was really famous for their fabrics. And look at this gorgeous pitcher of wine. Again, porcelain was another thing that Delft was known for. And just even here, this is a celebration of everything life has to give. But really soon, Vermeer starts making genre scenes that are much more exquisite and much more subtle. Out this piece. So the glass of wine, and again, this is a scene of flirting between a man and a woman. You can see the woman, she's sitting on the chair and she's drinking a glass of wine. A man standing sort of like right above her, in a way, dominating her with her posture, and she's just trying to avert her eyes. She looks very shy. There are ways we could interpret it, but maybe, he kind of like is encouraging her to drink some wine, so she get a little bit tipsy, a little bit more willing to take the flirting a little further. And she almost like, she's not sipping wine from this glass. She's going bottoms up, sort of kind of being like, all right, okay, let's do this. And in the painting, we can't see the eyes of either the woman or the man. It's very kind of like it's very subtle again, but we can just tell what's going on from the little details in the painting. Finally, the art critics discovered this gorgeous stained glass that you can see on the left in the window. This is an allegoric figure of prudence. And so it's kind of shining its light at the girl, sort of being like, come on, stop this, you're a decent girl. So there is also a subtle, like this additional subtle message here. But again, there is even more. Look at the musical instruments in the chair here. Maybe they were playing some music together. And in general, when you see musical instruments, especially in the Renaissance art or Baroque art, Dutch art of the 17th century, it often implies some sort of a love story. You see that a fair amount here. Anyways, again, we can see Vermeer's fascination with different textures in the painting, the gorgeous carpet, the white picture, and finally, of course, this just gorgeous color of her dress. It's beautiful. Finally, look at her hat here. I told you he was discovered around the same time when Impressionists were becoming popular. And one thing that Impressionists kind of like brought into the art world is the fact that shades can be colorful. We see that a lot, like in an Impressionist painting, we see like a white dress with an orange shadow on it, which, it was so out there. And Vermeer also does that in a very subtle way. Look at her, the back of it, how it's like a little bit blue. And again, this is just his admiration of the different textures and such. A wonderful question about the painting on the wall. I actually don't know. It's hard to tell because you don't really see much there. It looks like maybe a dark landscape. I would say in general, the language of art at that time can be interpreted really in a really straightforward way. The man and everything behind him, including the picture of the wall, is really dark. The girl with her beautiful bright clothes, she is more of a in the light. And this could be a depiction of like the right and wrong, the forces of light and dark. And so I'm not sure if we are even supposed to know what is in that painting, but this is me speculating a little bit about the painting on the wall. Another genre scene of a similar type of topic. Again, there is drinking involved, but this is almost like the second thing. What happens next? Because here we can see, this is a different girl, but look, if you just look at her face and the look in her eyes, she looks a little bit like she has already had something to drink. And the man next to her is kissing her hand and kind of approaching her in a sly way. There is some sort of playfulness going on in between the two. Look at the guy in the corner and his melancholic, sad gesture. He is totally bored and just wonderful. Again, very subtle, not as much out there and as we would see in some of the contemporaries' works, but I love it. And are you already noticing that these two things take place in the same room? We will see that a lot in Vermeer's genre scenes. He created, like I said, the majority of his pieces in his house in one or two rooms. And one thing we do know about his life, I did mention that he ran a hotel, and his life outside of art was pretty hectic. He had lots of kids, more than 10 children, mostly girls. He had a wife, the wife's family lived with them. It just like he was in this, female kingdom. There were women all around him. He was working really hard, trying to support them all. And it feels sometimes that when he goes away to paint, this is like an act of self-care and meditation for him. And as I mentioned, yeah, he does paint a lot of fun subjects like that, but this could be part of the reason he spends so much time on his works and works so hard on them, because this is his way of expressing himself and just helping himself calm down a little bit. And yes, same glass window. It is the same room. This one, it has a lot more going on and is a little bit, also a little subtle too. This is called, another name for this painting is a music lesson. And what we can see here is a young girl and her music teacher. And the subtle details in the painting again tell us that this also could be a love story. First of all, you probably noticed two musical instruments, right? She's playing the virginals, and on the ground here you can see a large, what looks like a cello. Correct me if I'm wrong. Two instruments, a love song, and already is an allegory of love. But there is another interesting detail here. If you look at the girl's body, it really looks like she's facing straight and her face is sort of looking down at the originals, the piano, but the mirror above her shows it a little bit differently. And in the mirror, she is turned towards her teacher. This is a very subtle sign that she possibly is interested in him. He is kind of depicted in motion a little bit, moving towards her, and she's standing incredibly still. You can almost see her stiff shoulders, kind of like she's shy, and if you look at the two figures, you see there is an obstacle right in between them. This little blue chair right there. In a way, the way the painting is arranged, the composition shows us in a way that maybe they can't be together. However, the man, the teacher, is starting to make his step towards her, because you can see his hand is like in the middle of the chair. So quite an interesting, again, very subtle love scene going on. But I also want to draw your attention to, again, the compositional choice that the artist makes. He just moves everything, all the action over to the right. And in the far back, kind of almost like unconsciously showing us that, okay, here you go, guys. I'm giving you this, love story so that you are entertained. Now I can finally focus on enjoying painting the beautiful textures. And just notice how his way of painting this gorgeous carpet that appears again and again and again in the paintings just changes. And here I think, especially if you compare this with the very first one I showed you, with the flirting and the beautiful yellow dress, it was bright. Here it's in the shadow, but you can feel the fuzzy texture of this carpet and the heaviness of it just falling down the table. The picture that we can recognize again is the same. And this is, again, absolutely lovely. And how he paints the floor, how he paints the light in the room, I believe is just quite incredible. Let me check the chat real quick. It's I hear that I saw a comment that it looks like the chair is not actually physically between them, and it's true. It's not physically between them. It is a little bit closer to us, but the way that we look at the painting and the way that it's arranged, it doesn't have to be physically in between them. If we look at the space on the surface of the painting, we could still perceive it that way. But if you don't agree with the theory, it is absolutely okay. It's not like Vermeer himself explained what is going on in the painting, and we all can have our own view of what it is. You absolutely don't have to agree with me on it. When it comes to talking about this painting, I want to share another interesting theory and finding with you. About 100 years, or a little bit over 100 years after Vermeer's pieces were discovered and admired so much, there was a finding. Lots of works were published on this topic. And the finding was the use of camera obscura by Vermeer and other contemporaries. And that discovery made some art theoreticians, historians doubt the skill that the artists possess. Let me show you kind of an illustration of what that looks like. It was basically a tool that made painting a little bit easier for the artists. With the use of lenses, it helped project the picture onto a wall where an artist could trace it. In this illustration, you can see that it goes upside down, but all it took is adding one more lens and it would be the right side up. And a lot of artists used camera obscura to help them paint when it came to perspective, when it came to lines, and so on. And it truly was discovered that Vermeer was one of those artists who did use camera obscura in his works. However, after that became another wave of discussions, and basically people were saying that the fact that he used camera obscura doesn't make him a lesser artist, because of the little subtle choices that he makes when painting his pieces. And there was an 20th century artist, I think Jennison was his last name, who basically did the same thing. He used the camera obscura to recreate the same scene, and you can see how different it looks. There are small details that are a little bit different. The one that stands out the most, of course, is the girl and her reflection in the mirror, how she has to be looking at the teacher to be able to to have that reflection in the mirror, right? Second one, we just talked about the chair. So if we look at Vermeer's painting, to me at least, it really seems like the chair almost like bumps into the two of them, even though you're right, it is physically at the front. When with the camera obscura, if we recreate the scene, it really does look like the chair is not at all in the way, and they are both behind it and very close together. There are some other differences when it comes to light, when it comes to the textures. And ultimately, it's agreed that, and you can see that, I think that the light in Vermeer's painting is a lot more different. And all these little details that tell a story are different as well. Yeah, so another piece I want to show you also is a genre scene where, again, we can talk about all the little details. It's called A Maid Asleep, but we don't know for sure if she's asleep, or maybe it's a melancholic gesture. You know, if you think melancholy, the print by Dürer, this gesture became just incredibly symbolic to the state of melancholy. So she might be awake, but very sad. And if we just saw the left part of the painting, this could be all there is to it, but you've already been trained to try to look at the painting more and really see what else is different. And what we can see is an empty chair across from her. Of course, it's there for a reason. Maybe a loved one did not show up, or maybe a loved one just left, which is actually more likely because we see an open door right behind her. It just makes us guess and imagine what could possibly happen. But I want to draw your attention to a little detail on the left here. From the first glance, we can see a beautiful white pitcher with some fruit in the back, a gorgeous little napkin with, again, a beautiful carpet. But look, there is a brown glass laying on the floor, and it is incredible again how Vermeer is able to depict the transparency of glass. I want to apologize right away for a little mistake in the slide. This, of course, is not the MoMA. It's the Met. So if you looked at this tag and said, what? That doesn't make sense. It is a little mistake on my part. Another interesting thing that art critics say about the pieces by Vermeer is that there is, if you try to embrace them with all of your senses, you notice, of course, the richness of color. You notice the richness of texture, right? We talked about glass, porcelain, different kinds of fabric. But when you think about hearing, his pieces seem incredibly silent. Even in the pieces where we see music instrument, nobody's really playing them. And we have to remember that the 17th century in art was when Baroque art was really thriving. And Baroque art, like when you think of Rubens, for example, is really loud, is really dynamic. There's always a lot going on. And Vermeer's pieces are a wonderful contrast to that. Here we can see a girl opening and reading a letter. And there's not much to really say about it, right? A girl is standing by a window and reading a letter. But if you look at just the window itself and the curtain over there, it almost looked like it suddenly opened. And there is like a certain mood and state of shock, surprise, or maybe like a little bit of worry or anxiety when you read it. Maybe not. It depends on your point of view, but I do want to mention an interesting feature that we will see in several paintings by Vermeer later on. And it is common for Baroque art. It's a curtain that looks almost like a theater curtain that you will see in the corner of a lot of his pieces. You see this one now, and again, look at the composition. It looks like we're in the theater, and the curtain just opened, and here is a scene right in front of us. And this kind of theatrical nature is it's one of the features of Baroque. And this for us is Vermeer's very subtle Baroque. Another incredible piece that I will be showing to you up close. Again, I don't know about you, but to me, when I look at it, it makes me feel really calm, and it makes me think of silence. There's not a lot of noise going on. Maybe we can hear a little bit of milk being poured into this jar, but that is about it. The milkmaid, again, is a wonderful example of Vermeer's attention to detail. Let me show it to you up close first. I just want to zoom into first on the milk and this beautiful porcelain jug and this bread, and it's this crispy surface that, again, you can see a little bit of gold used by Vermeer in these pieces. And look at these colorful shadows again, right? You can see a little bit of the blue tag and a little bit of the blue skirt also showing in these clay jars, which is wonderful. I want to show you a little bit of her corsage too, with little specks of different colors that help us really understand the texture. And again, this is the painting without being up close, and here it is in a museum, and you can see again just how small it is and how meticulous Vermeer had to be to depict all of these details. Go back to our slides. To the symbolism of the pieces. I have to say that in Protestant Poland at the time, scenes from the Bible were not very common, and people would not really buy that a lot to decorate their homes. And genre scenes were a lot more common. What I'm about to say is, again, just another theory that some art critics have, and you can choose whether to believe it or not. But Vermeer was one of those uncommon cases of a Catholic in a Protestant country. It's believed that he was born a Protestant, but he married a Catholic woman, and him converting into Catholicism was one of the conditions of him marrying that woman. And as you know, there is more of an admiration of the Virgin Mary there, and art critics believe that there is subtle symbolism, religious symbolism when it comes to this painting. So it's called A Woman Holding a Balance. And from the first glance, it looks like it's a woman, maybe her and her husband run a little shop where they sell jewelry or precious stones. And here she is doing her little work and weighing pearls for the shop. But there is so much more symbolism in it. Of course, it comes from the painting that we can see right behind her. It does stand out, you know, like we saw in some of the previous work, that the paintings are barely discernible. Here it is pretty much discernible. And not only do we see that it's a painting on a religious subject, but we see that it is most likely the Last Judgment. When we see the figure of Jesus right above her head, the pretty much a line, right, that makes us associate the two. And of course, the Last Judgment and the scale and the weighing and making the decision also have a lot in common. So what we could possibly think is that maybe this woman is an allegoric real-life depiction of Virgin Mary, playing a certain role in the Last Judgment, maybe, especially because a pearl also sometimes was considered a symbol of Virgin Mary, as she was the shell in which a pearl was born. This is the interpretation of that symbol. This is another gorgeous piece that in a minute I'm going to show to you up close. But even before I do you probably already starting to see these subtle ways that Vermeer is showing us how he admires different textures. Like when I look at this piece, I just look at her collar and at the hood, because you can see where it's 2 layers of fabric and whether it's one, and where it's like almost transparent, and just how clean and crisp her clothes are. It's just incredible. But another thing that it's worth paying attention to, I'm going to show you, is again, colorful shadows on this metal picture. Check this out. When you look at the picture, you can see lines of blue and lines of orange, and just it makes the texture stand out so much and become so vibrant that it's incredible. And I just can't help myself. I'm going to show you this gorgeous piece of clothing up close too, so that you can really see how it's not transparent, right? Yet it's so thin, it like almost becomes transparent. And speaking of pictures, this one we do know what it is. It is the map of Holland. You know, again, in my previous talk, I talked about how the Dutch were just so proud of their new country. You know, they became independent relatively recently as a result of revolution. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this map in a little bit. Anyways, just look at the textures, and again, the gorgeous stained glass with the light coming through it. And I don't know, it feels like it's warm out to me. Or it's very sunny out. I don't know, maybe it is a cold winter day with a lot of sun, but it's just incredible how we can see these little details in the painting. I love that you guys are so active in the chat. I love it. whether the skirt is velvet. It could be. If you notice that in the texture up close, that's awesome. Again, that what I just showed you was Google Arts and Culture. Feel free to head there afterwards and explore. Okay. This one is one of my favorite. I just like it so much. So this genre scene is just a little bit more dynamic. And you noticed a lot of letter writing or reading in Vermeer's works, and that was pretty common for genre scenes in Dutch art at that time. But we can see there is the lady, she's writing a letter, and her maid is just standing next to her. Probably she has just delivered a letter to her, and she's standing there and she's patiently waiting for this lady to write it so she could deliver the answer back. There are lots of other little details. For example, you can see a little piece of paper on the floor in front of the table. That could be either the first draft of the letter that, you know, she just crumbled up and threw on the floor. This could be the original letter that maybe she hated and threw on the floor, because ultimately, I think when we look at this woman and how she's writing, there's a lot of energy. For once, for the first time in a while in Vermeer's work, we see someone who's like really working hard on something, and I just feel the energy. I don't know, maybe she's enthusiastic, maybe she's trying to find the right words. And then we look at the maid, and she's just an absolute contrast. She's just calmly looking at the window, and when I look at her face, I mean, she looks spaced out in a way, just like, I don't know, you know, it is, when you think about like just 17th century life, when we think about novels, movies that took place there, you know, it's all about the masters, the middle class people, but like servants have life of their own too. And like she's actively writing her letter, but you know, the maid, she has like a life of her own, and this is what she's thinking about right now, and she's looking at the window and like just she's in her own world. And I just think it's just so incredible. In a way, one of my teachers once said about this painting that, you know how it's very cinematographic, because in a movie sometimes, you know, we see a scene when the main character is like in a loud place, like a loud cafe or a busy street, and all of the sudden all the noises get like tuned out, muted almost, and the people around them get muted, and they just like have their own inner monologue, or they see something. And she compared the scene with this painting was this type of scene, which I think is really clever, and I absolutely agree. And oh, thank you so much for reminding me the curtain too. Again, this is this theatrical nature of this painting again. Yes, thank you so much in the chat. Yeah, it's again like a curtain opened, and here we see it. A scene like it is in the theater, and that repeats a lot more in his pieces. Finally, the most famous painting, The Girl with the Pearl Earring. I want to say that the novel and the movie are a speculation. You know, if you've read the book, The Girl with the Pearl Earring, or watched the movie, you should know that there's no way to tell whether that was true or not, and probably not true because it was all made up. But we know who it could be. It could be one of Vermeer's daughters, because he did paint his daughters a lot. And I read a really interesting article about it once, that to a lot of the viewers, this girl with a pearl earring just looks incredibly familiar. That almost everybody who looks at this painting can think of somebody they know who looks a lot like this girl. And I don't know about you, but I can name at least one person I know who looks like her. Especially because besides her face, we don't really see much of her. We don't really know what color her hair is, for example, right? And then just one, we don't know what her body looks like. It's all covered up and almost like framed. Her face is framed for us to admire. And a comparison that incredibly comes to mind immediately is that when we think of a pearl, right? It is called a girl with a pearl earring for a reason. When we think of a pearl, we think of it as being in a shell, in a surrounding that really brings the pearl to light to help us admire it. And this girl is a pearl too. She is encased in this turban and this big, beautiful gown. And her face, that is round in shape, makes us think of a pearl too. And one of the things that is also admired about this piece is the use of light by Vermeer. So with the use of light, he really makes her face shine like a pearl. It is even more evident when we look at her lips. It looks like her lips are wet. Maybe she was talking. Maybe, I don't know, maybe she just had a drink of water, but they are open a little bit. And it's almost like she's talking to us, and we can't tell whether she's turning away. She just said something and she's turning away, or maybe she's turning to us to tell us something. And this again is the subtle Baroque of Vermeer, because Baroque paintings, they do have motion. It's one of their features, and we see again that beautiful subtle Baroque. By the way, the word Baroque means an irregular pearl. We do see some pearls in the Vermeer's painting, so that could be a connection as well. It does look like Gwyneth Paltrow. Again, I can name also different people that possibly look like her, and not just celebrities, but people I personally know, and you probably can as well. Last piece I want to show you today is this one, and again, I mean, this is the quintessential theater curtain, isn't it? It's called The Art of Painting. And this is Vermeer's statement piece. His way of showing us, what painting is and how he perceives himself as an artist. The experts, the history experts, and especially the experts on costume and the history of costume, say that the way that this artist is dressed is outdated for the time that the painting was created. So possibly it could be done on purpose. Vermeer thinks of an artist who doesn't really care about what he wears, so whatever he wears is a little bit out of fashion. And in the light, with her face turned to us, we can see the model. She is supposed to be dressed as the goddess of glory, with a beautiful wreath on her head, with a horn, and this is a history book that she is holding. The idea of it is that Vermeer's art is going to glorify him, and he's going to make him famous. If not around the whole world, then at least around Holland. That's why you see the map of Holland. I told you about this map a little bit before. The map of Holland right behind the model. The art that's going to make Vermeer known to his whole motherland. And this is the last piece I wanted to tell you about. Please feel free to write your questions in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them. I'm just going to say one more time that this is being recorded, and I know some people joined not from the very start, so I will be sharing that in my main newsletter. So if you missed any of it, don't worry. You will see. You can always watch. You can always watch the recording later. All right. Let's thank you. How many pictures total did Vermeer do? So right now, either 34 or 36 is what's attributed to him. Floor tile perspective, whether it's unique to Vermeer. I would say no. We see these kind of tile floors in a lot of pieces that were created around that time. I will just pull up really quick some my slides with other Dutch works of that time to be able to show you that this was not at all very uncommon. It was a typical Dutch interior of that time. Let me see. Let me see what I can find. Some tile floors. Just to not make you wait too long. Another painting in a very similar interior. So the interior, the floor, quite common for that time. Okay. Did he use models? Well, yes, and his family were mostly his models. It's believed that his daughter, of which he had many, his daughters were his most common models. Being in that contribute to his early death? What a great question. Again, we don't know much about him, but yes, I actually did read that his wife believed that he was very stressed out about being in that, and that it could lead to his death. She named that as one of the reasons of his death. Why was Vermeer chosen? I don't know why he was chosen, to make fake copies of. Wonderful question. I think that there is a chance that during his lifetime, he was recognized as a great artist and that his works were valued highly, just because because of the pigments alone that he used for the pieces, but probably because of the attention to detail as well. Yeah. The girl with the pearl earring is tiny. Oh, thank you for reminding me. I do have a view of what the girl with the pearl earring looks like in the museum. Let me see. I can show it to you as well, what it looks like on the wall, because it really is tiny. Just give me a second and I will show it to you. Here's a girl with a pearl earring. It really is small. Here it is on the museum wall. Which museum has the most Vermeer works? So you can actually see the name of the museum on the wall, on your screen right now. In English, we just call it Maurice House, and it's in The Hague. But also the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam has a fair amount as well. These would be the two. Of course, there are some other pieces by Vermeer around the world, like the Met, for example, has a couple pieces, but these two have the most. Okay, I think I have answered all the questions in the chat. I just want to say again that I really appreciate your questions. I see. Oh, yes, of course. You're welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate having an audience. And I will share the recording with you soon, within the next couple of days. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and thank you for joining me today.